teenage son suddenly stopped talking to me, and after months of silent treatment he finally admitted he discovered old emails where I had planned to leave his mother years ago, and now he believes I never actually wanted him to be born. I never believed the silence could be so suffocating. I'm 37F, living in Denver now but from a tiny town in Ohio originally. My son, Elian, 15M, had been my shadow for years, constantly talking, constantly joking, constantly around me even when I wanted some space. And then, all of a sudden, it just stopped. He would not respond to my texts, would not answer my calls, barely looked at me. At first, I thought it was a phase. 15 is when that is supposed to happen, right? Hormones, school drama, all that trash. Weeks turned to months, and nothing. Every time I did reach out, just a hello, it was like I was talking to a ghost. His other brother, Marvin, 22M, is on the other side of the state, so I didn't want to call that one in yet. I just kept thinking, what did I do? Did I say something I shouldn't have? Did I fail as a mom? But I couldn't recall anything. And honestly, that was more frightening than anything else. The realization that he was angry at me for something I didn't even realize I'd done. I wanted to get it right, but every effort was brushed aside, and the silence was suffocating me from the inside out. My ex-husband, Derek, 42M, was the only person I could sometimes tell, though he has his own way of dealing. Detached, rational, unemotional, the kind of guy who thinks that logic can solve feelings. But even he wore a concerned expression when I explained to him about Elian's attitude. He'll get better, teens are odd. And I forced a smile, a nod, but deep within myself, this abyss of fear worked its way into my gut. And it all came down to a rainy Sunday night. I'd been walking back and forth in our small living room for hours, pondering how to come at him, what to say that would bridge the gap. And then he walked in from school, dripping wet, and for a moment, I almost thought he just continued to ignore me. But then he said low and soft, "Mom, I need to talk." I tensed. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for, hoping for, dreading. We were on the couch, and he did not even look up at me, only fiddling with the zipper on his backpack. "I did something," he said, and I knew my heart sank. I knew immediately what he was referring to. He had found the emails 10 years old, in my own hand, about leaving his father, about leaving him. I remember those nights, sitting at the rickety old kitchen table, hands trembling over the keyboard, not knowing, torn, with fear, with guilt, and with a desperate passion for release I knew not how to seek. Those unsent emails, never intended to hurt, and yet look at us now. "You were going to leave us," he panted, voice shaking. "You were going to leave Mom, and me. You didn't want me." And I felt like someone had plunged a knife through the chest. Because yes, I had thought of leaving, yes, I had been planning, in those nights of sleepless desperation, to escape, but I had always been stopped by the vision of not having my son. And now Elian believed I had never wanted him to begin with. I went to take his hands, but he pushed me away. I attempted to speak to him, to exhaust every last gasp of my being, but the words tripped and tangled. I didn't send those emails. I finally got out, voice breaking. I thought about leaving, but I couldn't. I couldn't leave you. I always wanted you. You're why I stayed. But he just shook his head, water gathering in his eyes, rage burning just beneath. Then why would you even write it? Why would you even think of it if you actually wanted me? And I couldn't answer that without confessing all the fear and hatred and exhaustion I'd known in those years. And I was afraid that would just make him angrier. I breathed hard, my heart pounding, and was able to get out. Because sometimes life is impossible, and we consider escape, even from the people we love. But to consider it doesn't mean I never loved you. I didn't leave because of you. You were the reason I didn't leave. And the room was quiet for a moment, only for the rain pattering against the window and his ragged breathing. I wanted to plead, to make him see, but I knew I wasn't sure if words could reach him any longer. I realized then that parenting is not all about giving, but about surviving with your children, through storms you never imagined. And sometimes the consequences of your own choices can manifest as betrayal to the ones you love most. Elian's face twisted, and I could see the storm inside him. Hurt, confusion, love, anger, all intertwined. So, all those months, all that time I had no eyes for you, all the shouting and slamming doors in your face, you still wanted me? I nodded, sobbing, because it was true. I never lost wanting you. I told him, and tentatively, slowly, he slipped into me, his head on my shoulder, as if he was afraid that I'd disappear if he moved a step closer. And in that moment, I understood that years of love, years of mute devotion, could be eclipsed by a mistaken act, or even by a thought wrongly construed. I thought of my life with Derek, the work stresses, the nights I had cried alone praying for an alternate path, and I understood that Elian's anger was not only directed at me. It was at the weight of living, the complexity of being brought up by parents who were less than perfect, human, doing the best they could. And maybe it was fine, or maybe it was intended to hurt, for pain highlights truth. I held him tighter than we both cared to, And he felt the truth in my heartbeat, in the warmth of my hug. Because there are times when love does not need words, there needs to be presence. And I promised him in silence, as he clung to me, that I would choose him always, every time, no matter what. That night, while he slept in his bedroom, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the nights I had dreamed of walking away, all the regrets borne silently, and all the decades during which I had asked God to make my flawed love enough. I knew that bringing up children is messy, complicated, with choices you're haunted by years later. But the one thing that was important, the one thing that was within my power, was that I kept going, kept being there, kept nurturing him, even when I didn't trust myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to encourage Elian to begin trusting me once more. I have no idea to this day how long it will take him to fully forgive me, for the shadow of those old emails to fade. But for the first time in months, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes, and I held onto it, shuddering, exhausted, relieved, because love is never a straight line. It's jagged, messy, full of missteps, but it's real. The next couple of days still tense, but there was a small crack, a chink in the wall that Elian had built around himself. I'm 34F, and as much as I hate to say it, I believe now that all those years of attempting to juggle work, Derek, and my own self-doubt probably made him feel like he had to take care of himself emotionally. He started to talk in other ways, hesitantly, tentatively inserting little sentences, one-word responses, tiny admissions. I noticed it initially on a Wednesday morning while I was flipping pancakes. He looked into the kitchen, grumbled, "Do you want coffee?" And when I nodded, he went to the counter and made it himself. It was tiny, but it was a beginning. We giggled quietly about some idiotic cereal mishap, and for the first time in months, I felt as if we were slowly finding each other again. But then came the hardest thing, the questions. Not irate questions, not recriminations. Simply questions that cut to my very heart and compelled me to confront things I hadn't confronted in 10 years. "Mom," he said one night as I tucked him into bed, "why did you even think about leaving if you loved me? Were you ever happy with Dad?" I bristled. I'd rehearsed a million answers, but none of them had felt right in the moment. I yearned for honesty without hurting him, for truth without damaging him again. I gulped and spoke. I was scared, confused, and maybe a little selfish. I wanted to live a life where I felt like I was free, where I could breathe. But you were never why I wasn't happy. I waited for you, because I could not stand to leave you behind. He looked at me with wide eyes, as though he were looking in my face for a sign of fraud. I wanted to inform him everything. The nights that I wept in the bathroom alone, the battles with Derek that caused me to question everything, the times that I fantasized about starting again someplace else. But I knew I needed to go slowly. He was 15, on the threshold of forming his own conclusions regarding trust and love, and I did not want to burden him with the entire weight of my adult fear. So I compromised on half-truths, on emotional scaffolding, to enable him to catch the essence without all the rough edges. Elian and I started to do little things together once more. Rides to soccer practice, short walks around the block, shopping trips to the grocery store where he'd pick out snacks I secretly did not approve of but let pass. Every moment was like recapturing lost ground, like piecing a torn quilt together. And occasionally, in the midst of these ordinary interactions, he would look at me that haunted, inquiring way, the one that reminded me that even now, he was still considering in his head if he was going to totally trust me. There were breakdowns, of course. On Monday he would snap at me in sarcasm, or slam his door closed for no apparent reason, and I would feel the old empty ache of failure. But then on Thursday he would comment on a book he'd read, or ask my opinion on a game tactic, and the ice would crack once more. And in those moments, I started to see his character as anything other than a shadow of fear or resentment, but as a complex, full of life individual, full of thoughts and emotions and contradictions. He is 15, but already possesses that ability to flip between deep understanding and sheer teenage obstinacy that leaves me reeling. I realize that parenting isn't fixing it all and shielding them from all the storms emotionally. It's riding the storms out together, sometimes in silence, sometimes uncomfortably, sometimes with all the words that you will ever have, and sometimes with none. And then one day, it hit a place I wasn't ready for. I was cleaning up the sitting room after lunch when Elian came in, his backpack over one shoulder, and blushed out. "I'd like to see the emails." My stomach dropped. I had spent all those years and not remembering them, burying them beneath piles of shame and evasions, and now he wanted to see them for himself. I felt panic building, but also, strangely, relief. Relief that he wasn't keeping suspicion bottled up within him any longer. Relief that he was confronting the truth, however distorted it appeared. "Elian, I don't know if you should do that," I whispered. "Seeing them, it could hurt you more." He shook his head. "I have to see them. I need to understand what you were thinking. I need closure." And there it was, the words I'd been dreading for months. I nodded, shaking hands, and scrolled back to the old emails on the laptop. I saw the shock on his face, the way his mouth dropped open and then snapped shut, the way he halted mid-step as if the words had struck him before he could even read them halfway through. I left him to read in quiet, beside him but not on the keys, so that he might soak up as he would. And as I sat and watched him, I came to see something deep. He no longer despised me. He was hurt, yes, sorely hurt, but he was also capable of living with the messy, hard truth, and that capacity, more than anything else, was a bridge. He'd read through to the end and shoved his chair back, looking up, face pale. "So, you were paying to leave, really?" he gasped. "I mean, I get it. You're human, but—" He stopped. I put my hand over his, hesitantly, warily. "Yes, I thought about it, but I never did it. I stayed for you, always for you. Those messages. They were my doubts, my uncertainty, not my decision." He shook his head back and forth, struggling to absorb it. "I guess I just assumed you didn't want me," he admitted. And there, in the thump of my heart, something shifted. The realization that children, even your beloved children, view your battles differently than you had ever envisioned, that your own solitary battles can look like betrayal to them. I hugged him afterwards, hard and long, to make him sense my pulse, to make him realize that I would always choose him, even if the world was too heavy to endure. And he hugged back, hesitantly at first, then stronger, as if to probe the waters of trust and find that the ground he stood on was solid once more. That night, as he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my coffee, replaying all the years that I'd spent living with fear, shame, and guilt, keeping him protected, I thought, by lying about how I felt. Undefined, but now I knew that imperfect, messy honesty is more powerful than silence. I thought about the emails, the nighttime wake-ups, the uncertainty that had once consumed me, and I understood that love isn't flawless. It's enduring, it's in showing up in spite of fear, it's remaining in spite of the convenience of departure. And I promised myself to keep showing up, day after day, in small ways, in words, in body, in consistency, until Elian no longer doubted my love. Because that is what parenting is all about, the gradual, persistent labor of rebuilding trust, of showing up, of being human, and of letting love be louder than fear ever had a chance to be. Ever since that evening, things slowly shifted between Elian and me, but in a non-linear fashion. I'm 40F today, but back then, I used to live every day like being on the brink of hope and despair. It was subtle at first, a little comment regarding school, a brief smile when I offered him his favorite snack. But these subtle gestures became our new language, a way of rebuilding the broken. I noticed he started initiating with me in little ways, leaning against my vehicle when giving him rides to soccer practice, pleading with me to explain the homework he wasn't understanding, even requesting and sharing jokes that I laughed at just as hard as I hadn't laughed in months. But the specter of those emails haunted us, the unspoken threat that one wrong move can cut wounds much deeper than either of us could have conceived. Derek picked up on it as well, but his way of saying it was always rigid and formulaic. "He's opening up," he would say, voice cautious. One evening at supper, I nodded, watching Elian across the table, how his fingers tapped impatiently against his fork, how he gauged each word before he spoke it, as if he was learning again to trust, as if he was testing boundaries that had been broken a long time before. And I knew that this would be slow work, many years, years and years, of work, and that each encounter mattered, each small act of forbearance, or largesse could tip the scales toward healing or plunge us back into silence. And then there was the conversation I had not seen coming, one that forced me to confront not only my own past but also the past of his father, Derek, and with the choices we had made as a unit. Elian sat on the couch, knees up against his chest, looking older than he was at 15. Face thoughtful in that way that told me he was grappling with more than I could even begin to comprehend. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "did Dad ever learn about the emails? About your thoughts?" I swallowed, remembering the sleepless nights when I had debated sending them, when I had dreamed of walking away from it all, including him. "No," I admitted, "he never learned. It was personal, and for real. I wasn't up to dealing with anyone, not even you." He nodded like a child trying to understand something that's too much for them. The way he tries to translate adult emotions into something he can handle. I just can't stop thinking about it," he whispered. "Like, what if you did really leave? What if I wasn't ever supposed to be here?" My breast tightened up. I wanted to scream that he was the most in demand, the closest to me in this world, but caution had to be exercised. I had to allow him to draw his own understanding before he could fully take in mine. "Elian," I whispered, soft voice, "you are simply meant to be here. You're why I stayed. Those messages were fear, not meant. I needed you, even when hope seemed gone. You are not a mistake. You were, and are, everything to me." He looked at me, tears glistening in his eyes, and for a moment we sat there in a silence that let the weight of that truth sink in between us. In the following weeks, I observed shifts not just in Elian but in the manner in which I parented. I grew hypersensitive to the subtle ways I could be misunderstood, hypersensitive to the lingering impact of past choices. I started keeping a journal again, something I had abandoned years earlier, not in order to remain stuck in shame but in order to track our progress, to remind myself healing is sequential and that every small link matters. Elian began revealing things about himself in ways that astonished me. One evening he said, "Mom, can I say something weird?" I agreed, my heart racing. I thought about those emails a lot, and I realized I was holding on to anger because I was afraid. But I want to try letting go. I want to believe you. My throat closed, and I wrapped him in my arms, holding him carefully so as not to overwhelm him, and giving him room to feel that it was his choice to believe me. "You may believe me when you are ready," I whispered. "I will wait as long as I must." And he smiled, a small, uncertain smile, but genuine, and I felt the first true sense of relief in months. I realized that trust is not something you extend, but it is something you are given, slowly and purposefully, and at times it involves hammering through the past to build a foundation for the future. Family dynamics also shifted in directions I hadn't expected. Derek and I had always existed in a stilted co-parenting dynamic, functional but not emotional, and now we were forced to negotiate how to move forward in a way that was supportive of Elian's healing. He suggested counseling, and I agreed immediately, understanding that having an outsider in the room may allow Elian to put into words things he was not yet capable of expressing to us. The sessions were challenging initially. Elian would shut down, not respond, or deflect questions, but gradually, he began to speak of fear, of anger, of betrayal, and it was in those moments, when I saw him vulnerable, that I realized how much it costs a child to cope with a parent's mistake, even when they love them. He wasn't simply coping with my past decisions. He was coping with the fact that life is not simple, that adults are not perfect, and that love never comes easy or simple. Watching him work through these feelings, I felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride that he was capable, that he could handle hard truths, and sorrow that he had to suffer them at all. And also deep, abiding gratitude. Grateful that he still wished to be a part of our family. Grateful that we had been able to mend the hurt together. Grateful that he was coming to understand that mistakes need not define relationships if people will be willing to repair the hurt. One afternoon, after one very intense session of therapy, Elian came in and collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but quieter than I had seen him in months. "Mom," he whispered, "I think I get it now. You are not perfect, and that's okay. I get it. I love you anyway." I nodded, my eyes fogging with tears, taken aback by the magnitude of those words. 15 years old, months of anger and pain, but he could say forgiveness in a way that made me humble. I pulled him in towards me, and for the first time since I had seen those emails, I felt real, tangible closure, not for him, but for me. The emails still sat there, a testament to my own fears and mistakes, but they no longer dictated our relationship. They had forced truth, confrontation, and ultimately a deeper understanding of love. And I had learned something vital. Parenting isn't about being perfect. It is about being present, showing up, loving more times than we are afraid, every single day, even when it's messy, even when it hurts. Because love, the hard kind, is persistent. It does not fade with rage, does not disintegrate with disappointment, it lingers. And in lingering, it becomes immovable, capable of weathering even the worst storms. Months, and Elian and I began slowly rebuilding our relationship. I'm 33F, and now, looking back on the whole debacle, I see that the silence we endured wasn't so much punishment or anger. It was how he wrestled with the shock, betrayal, and confusion of being a child who thought his existence was unwanted. He began smiling once more and more often, to tease and to joke, to say whatever he pleased. He even began to quiz me about my life before him, in that nosy manner only teenagers possess, trying to understand the person I was, the choices I had made, and the mistakes which had shaped us both. One evening, while I was folding clothes, he asked me what had happened on the night I had sent those emails, and I told him everything. The fear of not doing it, the sense of being trapped, the desire to run away, but the love which held me back from him, the reason I ultimately stayed. His eyes were enormous, a mix of incredulity and understanding, and he breathed gently. "You really wanted me?" I nodded, tears pricking at my eyes, and he said, "I guess I needed to hear that 1,000 times." And in that moment I knew that the silence for the past months hadn't been wasted. Hadn't been for nothing. They had given him room to process the truth alone, to wrestle with his rage, and to get to the place where he could embrace my love fully, unreservedly. Family dynamics also changed in some unexpected ways. I and Derek were more intentional with communication, not just for Elian's sake, but for us as well. We started having weekly family meetings, little chats where everyone could voice what they were feeling without fear of criticism. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments, lingering resentments, and moments when past mistakes reared their head, fighting to destroy the progress we had achieved. But we discovered how to navigate those moments together, patiently, truthfully, and receptive to hearing. Elian started to participate more actively, sometimes offering suggestions, sometimes just sitting quietly, listening. He even started talking about his fears and his thoughts with Marvin, his older brother, which had a trickle-down effect of healing through our whole family. It was amazing to see him grow, not just as a youth, but as a young man trying to grasp complex emotions, to see the flaws in the adults that encircled him, and yet choose love over unkindness. There were moments, too, when the wounds of the past resurfaced, like spectral presences flitting along the edges of unearned trust. He would sometimes ask me what would have happened had I left him, or if his dad had seen the fear that I felt. And I told him the truth, holding back, owning my mistakes but not making excuses for them, explaining to him just how much I loved him, how much he'd been a part of me. These conversations were painful, but they were necessary, creating a platform of honesty and openness that I had longed for. I learned that the emails, which had once been the source of so much angst and the portent of loss, had become a bridge of understanding. They were a catalyst for confrontation, a summons to conversation, and ultimately, a path for our family to reconnect with greater consciousness, compassion, and empathy than we had initially. As the seasons changed, I watched Elian bloom in ways that made me feel proud, relieved, and amazed. He acquired new passions, flourished academically, and began to form friendships that reflected the empathy and thoughtfulness he had developed during this difficult time. He retained teenage attitudes of moodiness, but now they were framed by an intense sense of security and trust. And I, a mother, learned to embrace imperfection, to understand that fear, doubt, and mistake are all part of the landscape, and that the ultimate test of love is endurance, being there every day, weathering the storms, and choosing presence over absence. I learned that my own past, as imperfect and daunting as it had been, had shaped me into a parent who could be compassionate, honest, and durable. And above all, it had helped Elian to develop these qualities in himself, guiding him to an awareness and knowledge of himself that would serve him for the remainder of his lifetime. On a peaceful night, after dinner, I found myself alone with Elian on the sofa. We were just sitting there, the kind of warm stillness that comes after storms have passed, when he turned to me, his eyes soft and clear, and said, "Mom, thank you for staying, for loving me, for being honest even when it was hard." My own throat closed over and I clung to him, feeling years of strain, fear, and misunderstanding melt into that one deep breath of connection. I whispered to him, my voice trembling, that I loved him, that I always had and always would, no matter what the future held. He wrapped his head around my shoulder, and I realized the emails, the silence for months, the breakups, were leading us to an even deeper, more lasting love. I thought back on how parenting rarely is simple or tidy. It's full of mistakes, doubt, and remorse, but it contains in it the potential to produce moments of breathtaking clarity, touch, and comprehension. And in knowing this, I felt calmed out. I knew we had far, far more to travel, that things would continue to arise, but that we'd built the way to work through them as a team. Undefined trust had been lost, then remade, stronger for having been lost. Love had been questioned, then reaffirmed, deeper for having endured. Undefined, and I realized that the most important lesson, for both of us, was that even when life feels impossible, even when fear and doubt threaten to overwhelm, choosing to stay, choosing to love, and choosing honesty can create something unshakable, something lasting, something worth every tear and every struggle.